The greenhouse thermometer read 115 Fahrenheit. The irrigation hadn't cycled in 2 days, and the heirloom wheat was beginning to collapse. At a botanical conference 300 miles away, Anthony Reeves finally noticed his phone vibrating. The caller ID said it was his neighbor.
What? No, that's impossible. The timer is automatic.
He left the conference immediately. By the time he reached the greenhouse, the afternoon sun had turned it into a crematorium. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating. The seedlings had wilted into gray crisps. He ran to the irrigation valve and froze. A heavy steel padlock was clamped onto the shutoff. He tried to force it with a wrench. The lock held. His neighbor called again. She had seen Rebecca Whitfield lock it that morning, calling it a security measure.
This isn't about security. This is personal.
And as the sun set, 14,000 heirloom plants were already dead. The next morning, Anthony Reeves stood on Rebecca Whitfield's front porch, fist still stinging from knocking.
This is about the greenhouse, I assume. The board fully supports my decision. You were wasting water.
You locked the irrigation during a heat wave. 14,000 plants are dead because of you.
HOA rules prohibit excessive utility use. I simply secured the community's resources.
Inside the greenhouse, the thermometer still read 115 from the day before. The air was stagnant, heavy with decay.
She did this deliberately. She wasn't even sorry.
He had tried buckets of water yesterday, but the soil was already baked concrete. The roots had cooked. From her kitchen window, Rebecca watched Anthony kneeling among the dead rose, a glass of lemonade in her hand.
Good. Maybe now he'll stop that eyesore.
The greenhouse had become a tomb, and the lock still dangled from the valve like a trophy. The next day, Anthony found the state's seed bank emergency number in his records. He dialed with shaking fingers. Within 2 hours, a blue-jacketed vehicle pulled up to the greenhouse gate. Dr. Naomi Sterling stepped out, already frowning at the padlock.
This is a state-certified facility. Who authorized this lock?
The HOA chair. She called it a security measure.
Naomi knelt beside the wheat trays, her expression hardening. She touched a brittle stalk.
This particular strain was irreplaceable. It was our only backup.
At the HOA meeting that evening, Rebecca stood before the board, arms crossed.
I acted within my authority to prevent water waste. The greenhouse was a nuisance.
The board nodded. One member muttered something about overregulation. Anthony clutched his clipboard with the state certification. But the room had already made up its mind. The morning after the HOA meeting, Dr. Sterling called Anthony. Her voice was clipped, professional but urgent.
That wheat is protected under the State Heritage Crop Protection Act. Deliberate destruction is a felony.
By noon, a local news van was parked on Rebecca's lawn. She stood by her door, arms rigid.
This is a massive overreaction. I simply enforced community water rules. I had no idea it was anything special.
The next morning, the local paper carried the headline, HOA chair accused of destroying state seed bank crops. That evening, the HOA board met again. This time, the room was tense and not everyone was nodding along with Rebecca.
I did not know it was a seed bank. The certification was hidden inside. This is a setup.
Anthony raised a copy of the State Heritage Crop Protection Act. The highlighter bled through the felony section.
It doesn't matter what you knew. The law is clear. You locked that valve, and those plants are gone.
The board exchanged glances. For the first time, Rebecca's authority felt like a liability, not a shield. The morning after the contentious HOA meeting, Dr. Sterling phoned Anthony. Her tone was different, more grave.
The USDA has been alerted. That wheat was the only viable backup for a Dust Bowl-era strain. Irreplaceable.
Federal agents in Navy USDA jackets arrived at the greenhouse that afternoon, stretching yellow tape across the entrance.
This was no longer about an HOA. This was about the country's ability to feed itself.
Meanwhile, Rebecca Whitfield hired a high-priced defense attorney, a man who specialized in white-collar damage control.
I need you to make this go away. It was a simple mistake, not a crime.
Inside the state agriculture office, Naomi laid out Anthony's legal options. The state was prepared to press charges.
We have grounds for a felony prosecution. but we need your cooperation and documentation.
You'll have everything. I've kept records since my grandfather first taught me.
As the agents cataloged the dead greenhouse, Anthony watched from the gate. The investigation had only just begun. The morning paper carried a new headline: USDA opens investigation into destroyed seed bank. Rebecca Whitfield saw the headline, and her face flushed with fury. Anthony Reeves has been stealing water for years. I was only protecting our neighborhood. At the greenhouse gate, a neighbor stopped Anthony, demanding to know if the rumors were true.
I have a state permit. I wasn't wasting anything. She locked the valve during a heat wave.
By evening, anonymous calls reached his employer. The board was asking questions. His boss called him in, face tight with worry, asking for an explanation.
It's a smear campaign. She destroyed 14,000 plants, and now she's lying to save herself.
Mr. Reeves is a victim, not a criminal. The state seed bank program is fully legal and essential.
The USDA confirmed the investigation would proceed, regardless of Rebecca's attacks. Dr. Sterling uncovered a leather-bound archive from 1935. The wheat strain had been hand-selected by Dust Bowl survivors.
This wheat kept families alive during the Great Depression. It was the last living backup of that resilience.
The state released an official statement. The destroyed seeds were a living artifact of American farming survival. Triticum survivis, a drought-resistant bred wheat preserved since the 1930s, has been lost to intentional neglect. A documentary filmmaker from a national network reached out to Anthony, wanting to feature the seed bank in a heritage series.
This isn't about fame. It's about honoring a century of farmers who kept these seeds alive through dust and war.
Rebecca posted a new video, demanding a forensic audit and calling the documentation government propaganda. But public sentiment had turned. Online forums filled with outrage over the destruction of a living piece of history. She didn't just lock a valve, she locked away a part of our agricultural soul. For the first time, Rebecca's confidence looked less like leadership and more like the flailing of someone cornered. In the State Archives' restricted vault, Dr. Sterling found a faded seed catalog from 1933. It listed the wheat strain under a Choctaw family name. A historical botanist confirmed the seeds were originally cultivated by Choctaw farmers in Oklahoma before the Dust Bowl.
This isn't just American history. This is indigenous cultural heritage.
The legal classification shifted immediately. Under the Heritage Crop Protection Act, destroying culturally significant seeds carried a mandatory minimum. Thomas Bear, a tribal attorney from the Choctaw Nation, called the state agriculture department within hours.
Those seeds are living ancestors. Their destruction is a desecration under federal law as well.
Rebecca's lawyer, sensing the escalating charges, proposed a settlement. The state declined. The district attorney's office announced they would pursue charges with the full weight of cultural heritage protection.
It's not just about my plants anymore. It's about an entire people's legacy.
In the conference room, the maps and seed catalogs took on a new gravity. The case had become a landmark. Thomas Bear arrived at the state agriculture building the next morning, carrying a leather satchel of ancestral records.
The seed catalog you found lists a keeper. Her name was Sarah Reeves.
He slid a faded family tree across the table. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, was Sarah Reeves' name.
She never told me the seeds were this important.
Thomas explained that under federal cultural protection laws, destroying these seeds was a desecration with severe penalties.
Your grandmother was a seed keeper of the Choctaw Nation. Her work preserved a living legacy.
Anthony pulled out a worn photograph of a Choctaw woman in her 30s, holding a basket of wheat.
She died when I was 16. All I have left is her garden journal, and this photo.
That afternoon, the team met with federal prosecutors. The case was no longer just about plants. It was about legacy. For Anthony, justice now had a name, Sarah Reeves. He would make sure the world knew it. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was thick with fear of lawsuits.
You can't do this. I was protecting the neighborhood.
The board voted unanimously to revoke her position. Her gavel was taken, her authority stripped. Her husband released a statement. I have filed for separation. I had no knowledge of her actions and do not condone them. Federal prosecutors announced they would seek an indictment under the Cultural Heritage Protection Act. USDA agents maintained a visible presence near the greenhouse and Rebecca's property, watching.
They're trying to destroy me. I just enforced the rules.
She grabbed a packed bag, but a patrol car idled at the curb. There was no escape.
She did this to herself. Grandmother's seeds are still gone.
Rebecca Whitfield was now completely alone. No board, no family, and the full weight of federal law closing in. At dawn, federal agents approached Rebecca's front door. She opened it in her bathrobe, face crumbling as they read the warrant. By noon, her mugshot was national news. The caption read, "HOA chair charged with federal heritage crime." The HOA board was served a lawsuit that afternoon. The community looked to Anthony, but he was quiet. A federal prosecutor sat across from Anthony in a sterile conference room, asking him to be the human face of the loss.
You want me to describe what it felt like to watch my grandmother's life work die?
He pulled out the photograph, fingers tracing the glass.
She'd hate all this attention, but she'd want the truth told.
Her seeds were a covenant. You are their voice now.
Anthony looked at Naomi, then at Thomas. He nodded slowly. He would testify. But the trial was still ahead, and neither Anthony nor Rebecca yet knew the full price of what had been lost. The day after agreeing to testify, Anthony walked through the greenhouse with Thomas Bear. The dead rose looked like a museum of failure.
When a seed dies, it does not disappear. It waits in the soil for someone who remembers. Our elders taught this.
Anthony stared at the sepia photograph of his grandmother, the basket of wheat across her lap.
She didn't just save seeds, she saved us.
In the state office, Naomi laid out the courtroom steps, her pen tracing boxes on a legal pad.
Direct examination, then cross. The defense will try to make you look emotional or vindictive. Stick to the facts.
The facts are that she killed 14,000 plants and my grandmother's last living gift.
Then you're ready. The truth is not a performance, it is a planting.
The trial date was posted the next morning. Rebecca Whitfield's name appeared first on the docket. Anthony folded his grandmother's garden journal into his jacket. He was ready to plant the truth. The courtroom was filled with reporters and tribal representatives. Rebecca Whitfield sat pale at the defendant's table, her pink vest now a memory. Her attorney's voice boomed. My client simply enforced community water rules. She had no knowledge of the greenhouse's significance. The judge nodded to the bailiff, who called the name that hushed the gallery. Anthony Reeves stood.
I grew you about Sarah Reeves. She saved these seeds through dust and drought. They were her covenant.
He held up the sepia photograph. For a moment, the courtroom felt like a chapel.
When I saw those dead plants, I didn't just lose a crop, I lost the last living breath of her hands.
Rebecca's lawyer rose to object, but the jury was no longer looking at him. Thomas Bear watched from the gallery, a single tear tracing his cheek. The prosecution rested its emotional case. The ignorance claim now seemed a thin lie. The judge's gavel remained silent for now, but the shift in the room was louder than thunder. The prosecution entered the HOA meeting minutes into evidence. A record clerk handed the binder to the judge. Mrs. Whitfield noted in her own handwriting, "Greenhouse certified by state, complaint invalid." Next came an email from Dr. Sterling's office, sent to Rebecca 2 months before the lockout. This is to confirm the Reeves greenhouse is a state seed bank facility and must not be impeded. Rebecca's lawyer moved to suppress, but the judge waved him down. The evidence was in.
I handled hundreds of HOA emails. I must have overlooked that one. It was a mistake.
The prosecutor displayed the red receipt, time-stamped from her IP address. Rebecca's face went ashen. The judge's voice cut through the silence. You had legal notice and chose to ignore it.
I didn't think it was that important. Just some government paperwork. I didn't know.
The defense rested. The jury sat stone-faced, but the case against Rebecca had become airtight. In closing, the prosecutor held up the photograph, then pointed at Rebecca.
These were more than seeds. They were a birthright she burned without a second thought.
The defense could only offer a thin rebuttal. She was a concerned citizen who made a mistake. The judge gave instructions, and the jurors filed out. The wait began. Anthony sat in the hallway, the sepia photograph resting on his knee. Thomas and Naomi flanked him.
Whatever happens, she knows we fought for her.
After only 3 hours, the bailiff called them back. The jury had reached a verdict. The foreman stood. On the charge of felony destruction of state heritage crops, we find the defendant guilty.
No, this isn't right. I didn't know. I swear.
The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted, but Anthony only let out a slow breath. Sentencing would come next. 1 week later, the courtroom filled for the final act. Rebecca Whitfield stood at the defendant's table, pale and silent. The judge read without emotion. 5 years federal prison for the destruction of state heritage crops. He then turned to the Homeowners Association. They would fund a $4 million genetic recovery program. The HOA board members, sitting rigid, knew their insurance would never cover the full sum. Rebecca doubled over as the bailiffs moved to cuff her. Her sobs filled the sudden silence. On the courthouse steps, a cluster of reporters awaited Anthony Reeves.
This was for my grandmother, Sarah Reeves. She planted these seeds through dust and war. I won't let her work be forgotten.
Flanking him were Thomas Baer and Dr. Naomi Sterling, their presence a silent affirmation.
The Choctaw Nation will ensure her legacy is protected under full federal law.
But the sentence was only the beginning. Now, the real work of recovery had to begin. The next morning, Anthony and Dr. Sterling returned to the greenhouse. This time, it was no longer a crime scene, it was a salvage operation.
We'll screen every inch for residual DNA. But finding an intact seed, that would take a miracle.
They worked in silence, sifting through baked soil and shattered trays. The smell of decay still lingered. Then, in the corner beneath a collapsed shelving unit, Naomi's gloved hand paused.
Anthony, I think we've got one.
In the state lab, they confirmed viability. The seed's embryo was dormant, but alive.
This seed carries the breath of our elders. With your permission, I will bless it before it leaves this place.
Anthony held the photograph of his grandmother as Thomas performed a quiet ceremony, a low chant filling the room. The seed was placed in a cryopreservation unit, the first tangible hope in the long journey of restoration.
One seed. It's not enough, but it's something.
The State Agriculture Department held a televised press conference to launch the Genetic Heritage Recovery Initiative. Dr. Sterling held up the HOA's check for $4 million. The crowd of reporters broke into applause. Then Anthony stepped forward, a small tin of seeds in his palm.
These 20 lines are from my grandmother's personal collection. They belong to the recovery now.
Within a week, the state legislature fast-tracked a new bill. It would become the Sarah Reeves Heritage Seed Protection Act, closing loopholes for cultural crop destruction. Thomas Baer presented Anthony with a framed tribal proclamation.
You are Tallahassee, one who plants the ancient way. Your grandmother's name is now part of our official record.
She would have been embarrassed. All she ever wanted was to keep the seeds alive.
In the lab, technicians began tissue culturing the lone seed under sterile lights. The law carried her name. The seed carried her breath. 6 months after the trial, a green shoot emerged in the tissue culture lab. The staff called it Sarah's First. Anthony and Thomas drove the fragile plant to the Choctaw Heritage Farm, a convoy of one. Elders had prepared a small plot in the Heritage Garden, the soil blessed before dawn.
This wheat has traveled through dust, through greed. Now it comes home.
Anthony knelt, the potted wheat cradled like something that could break but wouldn't. A young Choctaw girl approached, holding a trowel. Her grandmother had told her about Sarah Reeves.
This is for you, Grandma, and for every child who will eat this bread.
Together, his hands over hers, they lowered the roots into the earth. The elder's song rose. She patted the soil, and Anthony let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. A single stalk stood against the sky. The wind carried a promise, and the future finally felt like something that could grow. A month later, the greenhouse grounds transformed. Flowers bordered a new bronze plaque, and the state and Choctaw flags flew side by side. The plaque read, Heirloom Heritage Garden in memory of Sarah Reeves, seed keeper of the Choctaw Nation. Tribal elders sang a blessing, their voices rising with the wind. Thomas Bear translated softly for Anthony.
They are thanking her for the harvest that will come, for the children's children.
Neighbors came too, Mrs. Chen, who'd called him that first terrible day, and a few HOA members who had quietly supported him. Anthony stepped to the front, his grandmother's photograph in hand, and spoke without notes.
She never wanted attention. She just believed that a seed could change someone's life if you kept it safe. Thank you for helping me prove her right.
The crowd dispersed slowly, but the young Choctaw girl from the planting lingered, placing a single wildflower on the plaque. Anthony watched from a distance, the photograph pressed against his heart. The garden was no longer a graveyard, it was a beginning. That evening, after the last guest had gone, Anthony walked alone into the restored greenhouse. The rows of wheat stood tall, their heads golden in the fading light. He stopped at a row of the heritage strain, Triticum survivus, the one his grandmother had kept alive for decades. His hand brushed over the stalks, feeling the same rough grain she must have touched 1,000 times.
She's still here, in every grain.
He pulled out her photograph, the sepia now worn from a year of handling. For a long moment he just looked at her smile and the basket of wheat she'd held in 1942. Then he tucked it back into his pocket and let out a slow breath. Outside, the new plaque caught the last light, but inside, the greenhouse was simply home. And for the first time since the heat wave, Anthony Reeves felt at peace. A new sign hung beside the greenhouse gate, Reeves Sarah Memorial Seed Bank. Below it, a smaller plaque read, "Protected Forever." A few days later, the young Choctaw girl returned, a wheat seedling from the first harvest cradled in her palms. She knelt in the memorial garden near the bronze plaque, the earth already turned and waiting. Her small fingers dug a hole, the beaded bracelet on her wrist catching the sunlight. From the greenhouse door, Anthony leaned against the frame, watching in silence.
Like her grandmother, and her grandmother before her.
She settled the seedling, patting the soil with both hands. The elders' song from the ceremony seemed to echo. The wheat stood straight, a deep green against the brown earth, a single stalk already reaching. The garden was no longer a memorial for what was lost. It was a promise of what would always grow. And a girl knelt, hands in the dirt, continuing a 1,000-year-old covenant.